Hello again, this is Dr. Lindsay. Now, inflation, we want to try to calculate inflation, and it's not as easy as it sounds. And the reason why is that not everything goes up at the same price. The price of pens is not going up at the same price as cups or calculators or computers. Some things are going up more than others. Some things might even be going down in price over time. If everything was going up at exactly the same price, if phones were going up 2% and the cups were going up 2% a year, it'd be pretty easy to figure out what the inflation rate is. But since all these products are going up at different prices or different rates, it's not an easy thing to try and figure out. So, for example, over the last 30 to 40 years in the US, inflation has averaged about 5% a year. My symbol for inflation is pi. On the average, about 5% a year. But not everything has gone up 5% a year. And recently, in the last few years, inflation's been a lot lower than 5%. But over the same time period, 30 or 40 years, healthcare has gone up about an average of 7% a year. More than everything else. So in real terms, even after adjusting for inflation, healthcare is a lot higher than it was 30, 40 years ago. The price has been going up, but it's been going up more than the average of everything else going up, making it relatively more expensive. Same thing is true in education. Although prices have been going up, the inflation rate is making everything go up. In education, the cost of education has been going up even more than the average of everything else, making it relatively more expensive. And so that happens a little bit each year over time. And after a while, healthcare is really pretty expensive. And so is getting an education. The most popular measure of inflation, the most popular, is the Consumer Price Index. Also known as the CPI. There's lots of measures of inflation, but this one comes out every month and it measures the cost of living for people. It's the one that's most commonly used and everyone likes to take a look at. This measure of inflation, the CPI, is published and calculated here by the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics at bls.gov. And it's the same people who calculate the unemployment numbers. The data comes out every month, and it's only for that month. So unlike GDP that comes out every 3 months at an annual rate, the inflation numbers come out for just the inflation for that month, and it's not done at an annual rate. If you want to try to figure out what that would be on an annual rate, then you'd have to multiply it by around 12 to get that information. Let's take a look at their website. Okay, so I'm looking at the latest numbers here right now as I'm making this video. It'll be different when you watch it. I encourage you to go out and click on the link that I have so you can see what the latest numbers are, because it changes every month. But right now, as I'm looking at this, the numbers for December 2020, they come out in January. It doesn't take too long for them to come out, was 0.1%. So a tenth of 1% inflation. Means prices went up by a tenth of 1% during that 1 month in January. And it says NSA, meaning not seasonally adjusted. Most of the macroeconomic data has to be seasonally adjusted. And once they seasonally adjust it, it's 0.2%. And that's a much better number to look at. And remember, it's just for that month. Then they have the last 12 months, the last year. What is inflation? What is inflation? Everyone wants to know what the inflation was over the last year. Here in this case, since December 2019, 1 year earlier, it was 1.4%. So 1.4% inflation for the year. It's not seasonally adjusted, NSA, because there's no reason to make seasonal adjustments if it's an entire year's worth of data. We make the seasonal adjustment if it's only part of a year. So 1.4% of inflation over the last year is kind of low. Certainly lower than what we've averaged over the last 30, 40 years, and actually lower than what most economists and central banks consider to be optimal. Optimal inflation is thought to be around 2% a year. So this is a little bit low. We'd like to see something higher than that. Then a little further on down, we have the average of inflation. Increase in prices here, all items less food and energy. This is known as the core rate. The amount of inflation excluding food and energy. And the reason why is because the food and energy tends to bounce around from month to month, and the core rate smooths things out a little bit. So we can say the core rate actually dropped a little bit in December. It was a negative 0.1%. And seasonally adjusted, it didn't change at all. Over the last 12 months, the core rate has been 1.6%. So just slightly higher than the average rate of all the goods. So this comes out monthly. Only for the month. It's not an annual rate. It's published not seasonally adjusted and seasonally adjusted. We really prefer to look at the seasonally adjusted numbers, though. It's published for all goods, and also the core rate is published, which is without food and energy prices. So CPI, monthly. GDP comes out quarterly, every 3 months. GDP is published at an annual rate. So what would GDP be if it continued at that rate for 4 quarters? The CPI, though, the numbers that come out are only for the monthly rate. They don't multiply it by approximately 12 or so to get an annual rate for it. And this is published seasonally adjusted and also not seasonally adjusted. Now, generally, we have inflation every month and every year in the United States. Occasionally, we will have some deflation where prices are dropping, but it doesn't happen very often. Let me show you the chart I snapped a picture of in March 2020 during the pandemic recession, when prices actually dropped in March. So I snapped this picture March 2020, and the consumer price index actually fell in that month by negative 0.4%, so almost 0.5% just for that month. Didn't last very long, though. The next month, it was positive again. Okay, so just to recap, the CPI numbers, which show our inflation rate, comes out every single month by the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. every month, and it's just the inflation rate for that month. They publish it seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted, but it's better to look at the seasonally adjusted numbers. They also publish what the inflation rate has been over the last year. I encourage you now to go and click on that link so that you can see what the current inflation rate is. They're usually pretty good about publishing it just a few days after the month ends.